In this story, there are two dwarfs. One dwarf's name is Ruth, and the other is called Keith. Ruth and Keith are neighbors, and they live in beautiful little huts. One morning, when Ruth steps out of his cozy hut, he notices something special. On the clothesline where he usually hangs his clothes, there is a beautiful sunbird. The sunbird stays there for a moment, almost as if it's checking something. Ruth watches closely, and soon the bird starts bringing small straws. Little by little, it begins building a nest. Ruth feels very happy. He's excited to have a new companion in the form of a bird. After all, he has always loved birds. The next day, Ruth steps out of his house, hoping to see the sunbird building its nest. But what he sees makes him sad. The sunbird is missing, and the clothesline is empty. Feeling disappointed, Ruth turns to go back inside when he notices something surprising. The sunbird hasn't left. It has just moved to a new spot to build its nest. The sunbird had flown to his neighbor Keith's house and was building its nest on his clothesline. Ruth also noticed something strange. Keith had placed cherries on his clothesline to attract the sunbird. This made Ruth furious. He knew Keith was doing it on purpose so the sunbird would choose to build its nest near his house instead. Angry, Ruth confronted Keith and started an argument, but Keith just ignored him. The next day, Ruth came up with a new plan. He brought a beautiful birdhouse and hung it on the wall of his house. And it worked. The sunbird hopped around again, moving from Keith's place back to Ruth's. She started checking out the new birdhouse. It was pretty, and now she didn't need to build a nest. She could simply place some straw inside and lay her eggs. This made Keith angry, and now it was his turn to argue with Ruth. They both argued, but nothing was resolved. Ruth, however, was happy and went to bed peacefully that night. The next day, Ruth excitedly stepped outside, eager to see the bird. But when he looked inside the birdhouse, it was empty again. Feeling curious, he checked Keith's house, and there it was. A huge, beautiful two-story birdhouse, big enough not just for the sunbird, but also for her friends if they wanted to join. Not only that, there were fruits hanging by Keith's birdhouse. So, of course, the sunbird hopped back to Keith's place, attracted by the ready-made food. This made Ruth furious again. He confronted Keith, but Keith just ignored him, feeling smug and pleased with himself. Determined, Ruth came up with another plan. The next day, he decided to change the birdhouse. Ruth bought a new, big, beautiful birdhouse. As an extra incentive, he hung some worms near it, knowing the sunbird would be attracted to the food. Sure enough, the sunbird hopped from Keith's place to Ruth's, drawn by the worms. Once again, Ruth and Keith argued, but nothing was resolved. The next day, Ruth stepped outside, eager to see what new trick Keith might have pulled. When he didn't find the bird in his birdhouse, he checked Keith's place. But Keith was sitting there, looking sad. Even his birdhouse, with both cherries and worms, wasn't enough to attract the sunbird anymore. The sunbird had moved to a third neighbor's house, a little farther away. This neighbor had lots of birdhouses, along with food, water, and plenty of other birds. The sunbird found the perfect place, with everything she needed, and even some new friends. Ruth and Keith finally realized that they had been fighting for nothing. The bird they were fighting over didn't care for their birdhouses. She was always looking for something better, and would move on whenever she found a new opportunity.